Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
Beach FM, we welcome back to the radio Ralph McAlister. Good morning to you, Ralph.
And very good morning to you, sir. As the weather gets milder,
Yes.
we get happier, I hope.
Wonderful. In a way, we seem to be crossing a line, a very awkward segue to what you were assuring me is an extraordinary book.
You got the title right, except for the S.
Oh.
It's called Crossing the Lines, and
Yes.
it's by Bren Coutts, who is an Otago University graduate, and he wrote this book over the last 2 or 3 years, and it's unlike anything I've read about the war ever, I think, John. It's it takes 3 gay men, homosexuals, who were, before they went to the war as soldiers, they were completely out in their own communities. They were gay. They were earning their living sometimes with being female impersonators. They joined the army, and they went off to the war after training. And what's so fascinating about it, and it's beautifully researched, Coutts does each person separately, then shows how they got together, and then shows what they did with their acts, which I don't think Kiwi concert parties ever been so well documented. We've all got some references to the troops being entertained in the Pacific and elsewhere, and in New Zealand, but not quite as deeply as this. And I was just deeply touched by the whole reading. And I'll just go through briefly who the men were. There was Harold Robinson, who was brought up in Dunedin, Ralph Dyer, Auckland, and Douglas Morrison from a small town. And the extraordinary thing about this being brought up before the war is that not one of them felt that he was going to hide his sexuality. And for that to be happening in New Zealand at that stage showed an enormous amount of courage, bravery, whatever. But the interesting thing is that they then, when they joined the army, they found that they got treated better by the army, by their mates, by the people who were on, in battalions and so on. They got treated better than they were being treated in their own places back at home. They were appreciated for their humour, for their openness, and they became almost icons in their own way. But also, of course, fought in the war. One of them was Batman to John Marshall, who became a future prime minister. And he used to call John Marshall, even then, who was his officer, colonel or something. He used to call him Marshy, and Marshy called, So it's a wonderful story. It's unlike anything I've read for a long time, and I'm just hoping that people buy it. It's a little bit more expensive. It's $50, but it has the most wonderful illustrations. So if you're near any bookshop, if you don't feel you want to buy this, there's so many funny, wonderful pictures, all authentic. And it takes you through these Kiwis who not only went to war, they not only survived, but they then had interesting careers afterwards. In fact, Harold married Frida Stark, if you know who Frida Stark was. Even though he was totally gay and she was a lesbian, and they got on swimmingly well, pun intended, for quite a few years. So I just love the whole normalcy of what I've been reading, and I do congratulate the biographer, the author, Bren Coutts, who probably from his photograph would be, I think, without ruining his reputation, probably in his 40s now, a straight man, he says himself, who at first when he was interviewing 2 of the men before they died, obviously, he was nervous because he just worried about whether they would be all right with them, and he got on incredibly well with them. So that's my book, and I'd love to read you just a little bit that would show the humanity if I've got time.
Please do.
Okay, well, Harold Robinson, who was one of the 3, at the end of the war, he didn't want to come home. They kidnapped him, the military police, and put him on into a truck, and he was sent on a ship to New Zealand, which he reached in 1945. During the journey home, Robinson remembered, you took your blankets and things up on deck, and you slept with your buddy. But such unique and not necessarily homosexual relationships born of war were about to change forever. And this is where he quotes Robinson. Yes. I recall the poignant thing of fellows who owed their lives to their buddy, someone who had hauled them out of terrifying positions. And the time came for them to go back to New Zealand. And there was Bob and Ron, who'd been living together for 3 or 4 years, eating out of the same dish, sharing the same food, doing the same lot of clothes, doing the same rifle practice, doing the same drill, being on duty, like left, right, and centre, fighting when they had to go and fight. They were going to go home. That Bob was going to go home to his girlfriend. That Bill was going to go home to a Sheila, who he had known for years and years. And their life was going to be changed remarkably. And I remember how terribly moved I was on the trip home, coming back to New Zealand. Nothing was as dynamic and so marvellous as the companionship that wartime develops and demands and creates between two soldiers. And I just thought, you imagine coming back. Well, I think he puts it better than anybody I can do, And, of course, now I hasten to add, a lot of these relationships were, most of the men, of course, weren't gay, but they were in those relationships for security, for comfort, for love. So, and all this becomes extremely beautifully realized by crossing the lines, which I do urge for your listeners to think about and look at, and perhaps realize that this is a very important social document that deserves wide reading and giving great insight into men at war.
Goodness me, what a wonderful review. And what an impressive document. Well, that is magnificent. Ralph, you've outdone yourself, sir. You're setting the bar higher and higher. Thank you so much for joining us this morning here on Beach FM. Thank you so much, Ralph McAlister.
Thank you, John.
106.3 Beach FM.